Hello everyone and welcome back to more of the Labyrinth of Grisaia. Are you ready to go to the zoo today? I know I am. I want to go see some monkeys.
Huh?
Had she overloaded her mind thinking about living things until the idea somehow popped out? It had certainly come out of nowhere. When sitting in a chair and thinking doesn't get you anywhere, you might as well try getting up and actually doing something. It was a simplistic, careless line of thought, but that was par for the course where Kusakabe Asako was concerned. The next Wednesday, after practically forcing me into giving her day off work, she headed to the East Beach Animal Park with Kazami Yuuji in tow. The boy hated crowds and confined spaces like trains, so the two of them drove over in a convertible four-wheel drive, bringing the boxed lunches I made for the occasion. Of course, this was the first time Asako had ever taken a child to the zoo. She didn't exactly know how to proceed once they actually got there. For starters, they wandered over to the elephants. You never go to the elephants first. The elephants are amazing, you save that for last, otherwise everything else will be a letdown from here on out. And then to the giraffes. And then to the zebras. And then to the koala bears. Their haphazard tour had taken them past quite a variety of animals by this point, but Kazami Yuuji looked as drowsy and as disinterested as ever. He hardly reacted to anything at all. Trying to find something more impressive, Asako brought him over to the cages where they kept the big carnivores. But even then, the boy only offered a few bland comments along the line of, "That's a lion, huh? It's pretty yellow." Seemed like he was making an effort to express his honest thoughts, knowing that Asako had gone out of her way to bring him over here. But compared to realizing that a kid was trying not to hurt your feelings, it probably would have been less frustrating if he'd just stayed totally silent. You call this the king of beasts? Useless piece of crap. Clutching at the bars of the cage, Asako silently glared daggers at the perfectly innocent animals within. Perhaps detecting a certain whiff of bloodlust in the air, one of the male lions turned in our direction and let out an intimidating roar. Naturally, this only got Asako to stand her up. What's with the attitude, you worthless little shit? From the lion's perspective, it might as well have been a stage roar intended to provide his paying audience with a nice little thrill. When this was answered by a furious threat on his life, the poor thing didn't have much choice but to slink off in defeat. Some customers just love to make your life difficult. Kazami Yuuji had watched all of this in a state of wide-eyed astonishment. And for one very brief fleeting moment, he apparently cracked a smile. He'd come all the way out to the zoo, but in the end, Kusakabe Asako had proven the most bizarre beast of all. With that tidy conclusion to the outing, the two of them returned home. That was a nice day out.
それでも最近は少しずついい方に向かってきてるんじゃない？相変わらず量は少ないけれど、食事も自分でするようになってきたし。
That's good.
まあな。それでもまだ夜中にうなされて何度も目を覚ます。相手はガキだし、酒飲んで寝ちまえってわけにもいかんしな。
生き物との触れ合い作戦も微妙に効果が薄かったみたいね。
あ？なんだその脱線作戦名。ありえねえだろ。
あなたにだけは言われたくないわよ。
それにまだ作戦は終わっちゃいねえ。本番はこれからだ。
本番って何をする気なのよ。
あいつ自身の手で生き物を育てさせてみるってのはどうだ？
育てさせるって何を？
犬。
A dog?
犬？
実はもう K9 の連中から子犬をもらう約束をしてやる。今日後でもらいに行ってくる。
Aw, Yuji's gonna get a puppy. I love puppies. That same evening, Asako returned to her cabin with a single young border collie in her arms.
なんだ、K9 からもらってくるって言うから
That's
ジャーマ
adorable.
ンシェパードの子犬だと思ったのに。
野戦用に試験導入されたボーダーコリー部隊の新生児だ。たくさん生まれて手に負えないって言うから一匹タダでもらってきた。ほらユージ、かわいいだろう。
A dog.
今日からこいつはお前の犬だ。相棒、ペア、バディ、好きに呼べ。
Buddy.
お前が2年兵ならこいつは初年兵。つまりは戦友だ。しっかりと面倒を見ろよ。
Me and this dog will go on the grandest of adventures.
そう露骨に面倒そうな顔をするなよ。こいつはまだ子犬だ。お前が面倒を見なきゃ簡単に死ぬ。大切に育てると約束してもらってきた犬だ。死なすなよ。
Alright. When she put it that way, Kazami Yuuji didn't have much choice but to agree, however reluctantly. Asako promptly pushed the puppy to his chest. Holding it carefully in one arm, he reached up to scratch it on the head. What's its name?
なんだったかな。全部の子犬に名前がついてたような気もするが。
What would we call a dog like this? Let's name him Ralph. He looks like a Ralph.
犬舎の隅っこでガタガタ震えてる一番弱っちいのを掴んでもらってきたってこと以外はよく覚えてない。
アバウトだな。
まあいいじゃねえか。もうお前の犬だ。名前はお前がつけろ。
Alright then. John. I mean, it's no Ralph, but it'll do.
また適当な。ジョン・ルーは身元不明の死体につける名前よ。
His last name is Maxwell, thank you.
そいつはメスだぞ。
Girl.
女の死体ならジェーンだろう。
そういう問題じゃないでしょ。
Surprisingly, Asako's spur of the moment attempt at animal therapy actually proved quite effective. The presence of a pet that was absolutely dependent on him for survival spurred Kazami Yuuji into developing a certain sense of responsibility. The change was gradual, but we began to observe signs of general improvement. One day I noticed the boy smiling as he tossed a ball around the cabin for the dog to fetch. It was a genuinely startling sight.
この子が笑ってるところ初めて見たわ。
It was a distinctly awkward, stiff expression, but when I saw it, I couldn't help myself from smiling as well. On a not unrelated note, by this point I was also beginning to observe remarkable changes in Kusakabe Asako's behavior as well. Asako had always been known for her daredevil attitude. She was selfish, arrogant, and utterly fearless sometimes. She would be so reckless that it seemed as if she actually wanted to die on the job. But lately her methods had become increasingly careful and prudent, a change that was the subject of much discussion. It's probably safe to say that this had a lot to do with her new role as a guardian. Just as John was contributing to Kazami Yuuji's psychological healing process, Kazami Yuuji himself appeared to be having a similar effect on Asako. Knowing that the boy was relying on her protection, Death was evidently losing whatever appeal it had once held for her. The childish pride she found in behaving recklessly seemed to be fading.
子供ってのは面白いな。教えれば何でも覚える。教えた先を自分で考えて予測もする。
So at some point to raise them well.
まだ教えてないこともいつの間にか自分で覚えていたりする。育つってすげえな。
まあユージは特に頭がいいっていうか変にずる賢いところもあるしね。
私はいい意味であいつのそういうところも気に入っている。
Some Yuuji had recovered significantly in his time with Asako, to be sure, but the darkness in his heart hadn't faded completely. He found it impossible to trust anyone other than Asako and me. He couldn't stand to go anywhere even slightly crowded with people. Fearing the gaze of strangers, he wasn't even capable of walking his dog through the streets of the nearest town. We'd been planning to let him heal slowly in the peaceful quiet of the forest, but It was becoming increasingly obvious that walking around a deserted mountain wasn't going to help him rejoin society. It was around this point that Asako abruptly submitted a letter of resignation to the organization known as Ichigaya. As a case officer, I was able to stop the letter at my desk before word reached the upper ranks. With that done, I immediately rushed over to Asako's cabin to confront her.
ちょっとAsako、会社に辞表を出すなんてどういうつもり？
JB is like super serious. Asako is like, whatever.
ああ、疲れた。いい加減しんどい。
会社を辞めるってどういうことか分かって言ってるの？ファミレスの学生アルバイトじゃあるまいし、だるいから辞めますじゃ通用しないのよ。
分かってるよ。
分かってないわよ。あなたは曲がりなりにも SARS の根幹をなす工作員なのよ。はいそうですかって辞めさせてもらえるわけないじゃない。よくて終身刑、悪ければ殺されるわよ。
Wow, really? That's pretty extreme.
うん、両方とも嫌だな。なんとかしてくれ JB。
無茶を言わないでよ。
無茶を言っているのは分かっている。分かってはいるが、そこをなんとかというやつだ。なんとかならんか。
ユージの影響かしらね。最近のあなた少し落ち着いてきたように見えるし、これからっていうタイミングでどうして辞職なのよ。死ぬのが怖くなったの？
まあユージの存在が私に影響してるのは認めるよ。死ぬのが怖くなったと言うだが、それだけが理由じゃない。年のせいかな。右目の視力がどんどん悪くなっているんだ。正直言って超長距離精密射撃はもう無理だろうな。
視力か。
In truth, Asako's age likely had nothing to do with the matter at hand. In the course of an operation some years previously, she'd been struck in the right shoulder by a large caliber bullet. The injury itself was barely a scratch, but the shock of the impact had ruptured a number of capillaries, forcing a large amount of blood to surge backward. It had placed immense pressure on the optic nerve of her right eye. After 4 operations, the doctors had managed to restore her vision, but the overall impact on her body remained unclear. They hadn't ruled out the possibility she'd die a sudden death from acute circulatory failure. Asako's condition hadn't deteriorated in any detectable way over the last few years, but the lingering effects of that incident were clearly beginning to reassert themselves.
会社を辞めてどうするの？
おとなしく隠居ってのも柄じゃないしな。非常勤で後進育成の仕事でもするか。アメリカに戻ってハンティングスクールのインストラクターでもやるかな。
風見ユージはどうするの？
Yeah, what about Yuuji?
連れて行くさ。どこへでも。あいつはもう私の子供も同然だ。これからはあいつのための時間を少しでも増やしてやりたいと。
そう。
Okay. After this conversation, I proceeded to submit Asako's letter of resignation, or a heavily edited version thereof, to both Ichigaya and Akasaka. That's a funny name, Akasaka. In the end, she was permitted to retire from active duty, but not from her post. Kusakabe Asako would remain on Ichigaya's roster, if only as a part of the permanent reserve. I remember this part pretty well myself, actually. At the time, I didn't even know what Asako did for a living. And to be honest, I was too caught up in my own problems to spare too much thought for anybody else.
当時のあなたはまだ子供だったのだから、それでいいのよ。
You know, I thought I got past being a child a long time ago. But even now, I can't say I really feel like an adult.
実際にあの当時、あなたは何を考えていたの？
I feel like I was worrying about all sorts of things, but at the same time, I think I spent most of my energies trying to process the situation I'd found myself in, you know?
子供が経験するにはいろいろとありすぎたものね。
I can't argue with you there. Asako had taken me in. I was now living quietly in an isolated mountain hut, surrounded by nature. But for some time, I didn't really understand the ways in which my life had changed. My hospital room and its depressing odors had been replaced with a small cabin enveloped by the stink of ripe grass. The doctor who wore gold-rimmed glasses and smelled of cigarettes was gone, as was the nurse with the fake smile. They'd been replaced by a pushy, crude lady in a nagging blonde. That was about it from my perspective. Day in and day out, the only thing I thought about was escape. I had to get out of this place. I didn't even know what I needed to get away from, or where I'd run to. But that didn't change a thing. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay anywhere for too long. If I did, someone was going to track me down and kill everyone around me. I didn't have the first idea what that something was, but if it caught up to me, it was going to use my right hand to kill people. The words of Liu Sheng, Heath Oslo, still rang in my ears.
君は誰に会ってもいけない。会えばその人はきっと君を傷つける。役立たずの君を、邪魔者の君を殺そうとする。何を話しかけられても返事をしてはいけない。君の家族を殺したのもその悪いやつだ。君を傷つけ苦しめるために君の周りの人間を殺してしまうとても悪いやつだ。やつは君が大切なものを手に入れるたびにそれを壊しにやってくる。君がそばにいるだけで君の周りはどんどん壊されていく。君は何も悪いことをしていないというのにだ。君がいるだけで周りの人間皆が迷惑する。誰も君なんか必要としていない。君に逃げ場なんてない。誰も守ってなんかくれない。でも安心してほしい。私だけは君の味方だ。この世でたった一人の君の理解者だ。辛いね。苦しいね。もちろん私は全部わかっているさ。君は人生という木から落ちたまだ青すぎる果実だ。誰も君に見向きもしない。それどころか腐っていく君を見て眉を寄せるだけだ。そう。君は嫌われているんだ。だけど何も悲しむことはない。この私が君を拾おう。私が君を拾って種を取り出し、新たな大地に植えて育ててあげよう。やがて立派に成長した君は私のためにその枝にたくさんの果実をつけるだろう。それが私への恩返しだ。わかるね。けど今はまだ君を植えてあげる新たな大地が見つからない。悪い奴が邪魔をしているんだ。だからまずはその悪い奴を退治するところから始めなければいけない。そしてそれは君自身が自分の手で成し遂げなければならない仕事だ。さあユージ、立ち上がるんだ。その体が腐ってしまう前に。やれるね。やがて手に入れる約束の大地のために。
No.
君に選択肢はないんだよ、ユージ。
No. No. The Promised Land is your only possible destination. No! I've heard that dreams are the brain's way of processing our memories. I suppose that would explain why my nightmares were always so terrible. My brain didn't exactly have anything pleasant to work with. Awakening in the dark, I looked around the cabin. Faintly illuminated by the starlight filtering into the window, my pupils had probably dilated again. When I lifted my sweaty upper body from the bed, the entire cabin seemed to tilt underneath me. For a moment, it felt as if I might just slide down the floor and fall off into nothingness. I'm sure I was exhausted, physically and mentally, but it didn't feel like I could possibly fall back asleep. Only a certain curtain separated my bed from Asaka's. I could hear her snoring softly, almost like a child. I lowered my feet to the floor and stood up, then looked in on Asako. Finding her curled up like a cat in her bed, I proceeded to quietly make my way out of the cabin. What on earth was I doing here? It was long past time to make a break for it. But where was I going to go after I left this place? Nothing really came to mind. Maybe I'd just die by the side of the road somewhere. The idea didn't really bother me, to be honest. It wasn't as if I deserved anything better. My life didn't have any real purpose. I was just a small animal like any other, running around frantically because it didn't want to die. As I stepped outside the cabin, I glanced up and found the sky absolutely full of stars. It's so beautiful. The mountain air was clear and we were a long way from the glaring lights of the city, so the night sky was breathtakingly brilliant. I'd forgot just how many stars were up there. As I stared at the twinkling panorama above, feeling as if it might swallow me whole, I felt something brush up against me. When I looked down, I found the puppy Asako had given me, rubbing up against my leg. All right. Almost forgot about you, buddy. Even if I were to flee, I just couldn't leave the dog behind. Back when Mom ran away from my father, I was probably a lot like this puppy in her eyes. Not that I had any way to know for sure, now that she was gone. In any case, there was nowhere for me to run. There was no one left out there to protect me. Even the man who'd promised to keep me safe had disappeared. All I had left in this world was this puppy. Nothing else. But even so, this woman named Kusakabe Asako, she just might be able to help me. Even if the devil caught up to me and my right hand tried to kill someone again, she might be able to stop me. Even if my hand tried to kill her, she might be able to survive. She didn't seem the type to die easily. Maybe she'd even be kind enough to kill me instead. There aren't any saints out there. No one's really on your side. Trusting people is a good way to look like an idiot. I knew all that by now. But maybe I'd try trusting that woman anyway. Couldn't really hurt to give it one last shot, right? Let's go back in. Deciding to head back into the cabin and try my best to fall asleep, I bent down and picked up the dog at my feet. When I turned around, I found myself face to face with Asako. She was leaning against the doorway, arms folded with a wry smile on her face.
どうした？眠れないのならベッドで絵本を読んでやろうか。
I answered this somewhat sardonic offer with a deeply sarcastic smile. Alright then, Snow White sounds good.
言うじゃねえか。
From that point on, I found myself willing to trust this Kusakabe Asako woman, at least on a superficial level. This marked the beginning of my rehabilitation period. Little by little, I began to adjust to living with Asako and my dog in that isolated cabin.